little audio. Do you all hear that? It's not really working, but it's supposed to be a ticking sound because that is the sound of your biological clock. It is one of those familiar, foreboding sounds that we all wrestle with, I think, when we get to be a certain age, an age that I am long past, but that's okay. I'm still interested. The question is, like, how long is the window I have to have kids? Will I be able to have kids if I want, when I want? How will the timing affect my career? And so forth and so on. But things seem to be changing a lot since I was the age of many of you all, childbearing age. Exciting new technology is disrupting our traditional notions of what is possible for women, and we've reached an exciting inflection point in which women are gaining unprecedented autonomy over their reproductive futures, which is so exciting. Can we give a round of applause for that? So, I'm super excited to talk to my panelists today. Tara Comonte is, Comonte or Comonte? Comonte is at the forefront of this revolution. She is the CEO of something called Tomorrow Life Sciences, which has launched the world's first FDA-approved automated platform to safeguard the eggs and embryos used in IVF. She also happens to be an IVF mom herself, and she's joined by Liz Plank, who I said looks a lot like Carrie on Sex and the City this morning. Love it. Liz is a good friend of mine, and she's also an award-winning author and journalist who recently chronicled her egg freezing journey for the podcast Armchair Experts. So please give these two ladies a round of applause. So I think it's really interesting. As I mentioned, things have changed so dramatically from when I was having kids. I intentionally did not have kids in my 20s because I was singularly focused on my career. I wanted to have flexibility. I wanted to move around, and I didn't want some ball and chain hanging, holding me back, which is such a nice way of describing a romantic relationship. But I think if egg freezing had been an option for me, I might have taken advantage of it. And Liz, that was an option for you. And you recently underwent the egg freezing process in your mid-30s. So talk about your decision to do that and why it was the right time to start thinking about freezing your eggs and following through.
Yeah, actually doing it, yes. I turned 35, coming out of the pandemic. The pandemic actually had a huge increase in egg freezing. A lot of women realized, I don't know how long we're going to be indoors, and dating, whatever it looked like at the time was, it was tough, right? So I, like many other women, was sort of considering it, but I saw it as like a failure, right? That either no one had picked me, or that I'd focused too much on my career, that I was, this horrible woman, every woman in like a romantic comedy that's like so career focused and can't see that all the great guys around her. I was like, is that me? Is that why I have to do it this way? And I had one conversation with my friend Chelsea at the time, and she was, and I was nuts in my dating life. Like I was on every first date, like, are you gonna be the father of my children? Which is never the vibe. It's never a good vibe. Just in case anyone's doing that, not great for anybody on the date. And so, she was like, why are you trying to control dating when you're not, instead of being in control of the one thing that you can be in control of, which is your fertility, you should freeze your eggs. And so I decided to do it in that moment,
And so you had a total mindset shift during the process. You went from thinking you were a failure to like, I'm a badass, and I'm going to control my fertility choices.
Yes, and this was a few months after Roe was overturned. When women are being, basically take their control and their reproductive freedom is being taken away from them, and so it felt like a very like taking my power back and being able to do this too. It's one of the biggest advances in technology, period, right? The FDA only approved egg freezing for women who are, don't have any kind of issues, right? It's an elective thing, only 10 years ago. And so it's very new, it's very cool. And I was like, this is, just using, if I use a Fitbit, right, to make better choices for my life, I don't think that I've like lost or I've failed. It's just an upgrade, and why wouldn't I use technology in that way, you know, for fertility?
But you also talk about feeling like a lab rat and feeling kind of like it was the wild, wild west. And just as you said, the FDA approved it a decade ago.
Yeah.
It shows in terms of how the process works, right?
Yes, yeah. I mean, for anyone who, I don't know if anyone has ever done it in this room, but
Who here has frozen their eggs?
Yes,
Raise your hand.
raise your hand. That's great.
Yeah.
I love that.
Who here is thinking about
Oh
freezing
yeah,
their eggs?
thinking about it. Okay, great. I love this. I hope by the end of this panel you really. No, I think that's been my main thing. Now I'm just an evangelist for it because yeah, I did it when I was 35, and you know, the earlier the better. But yeah, we felt like lab rats. We, you know, you're mixing like you feel like you're in a meth lab at certain points, and that there's almost too much trust in you. You're like, I shouldn't be in charge of so much. There should be, you know, more support. And what's interesting is that yeah, it's not as regulated as you think it's going to be, and that was pretty shocking to me.
Yeah, we'll talk actually to Tara about that, because Tara is the CEO of tomorrow. You're at the epicenter of technology driving this new mindset. Before we talk about what you're focused on at your company, I want to talk about your personal story, because your daughter is now 8 years old.
Yes.
And she was conceived via IVF.
Yeah.
What have you learned in the years since that you wish you had known at the time?
Yeah, so I went through IVF 9-10 years ago, multiple cycles, multiple treatments. And at the time, I didn't tell anyone, which, looking back now, I find really strange, because I'm really quite an open person. But I think it was because this wasn't happening. Mm-hmm. There was still a huge amount of, even if it was subconscious, I think stigma, taboo.
Right.
So the years since I've gone through IVF, and the egg freezing process is identical to the IVF process in that it's the first step. The egg retrieval is the same step. And so in that 10-year period, what's happened is this whole topic has just become more mainstream. It's shifting from being one where women have been made to feel like failures, or feel like failures, to one where women are beginning to seize the reins. 1 in 5 couples struggles with infertility. 1 in 5. That is not a niche problem. And so that being understood is a huge shift in the last decade, and I think that education and awareness will continue to shift. And the other shift since I was going through this is that this is not just a women's problem. Half the time, the man is the one being treated. Half the time, the man is the patient in an IVF clinic. So this last 10 years has been a huge sort of groundswell in terms of moving from the back foot to the front foot for women, and for it to become just, as I say, more of a mainstream conversation. Employers are waking up, women are waking up, men are slowly waking up and realizing that it might be them. And really we welcome that. You know, this is a new era of transparency and empowerment and education.
Other than sort of the cultural perception changing, is there anything, Tara, about the process that you wish you had known a decade ago, looking back on it? Or were there things about it that propelled you into wanting to start your company?
Absolutely. So as you mentioned, so human IVF is about 44 years old. There have been incredible medical advancements in the field over that time. However, the tools and the technology and the infrastructure that support these clinics is woefully outdated. And many of it dates back to 40, 50 years ago. So as an IVF mom and as someone that went through multiple treatment cycles before I had my successful pregnancy, I would have liked to understand beyond just the piece of the clinic that you see, right? Beyond just that sort of engagement with the physician or the OR, the magic in egg freezing, the magic in IVF actually happens in the lab, but no one talks about it. And the lab, we have systems and infrastructure in the lab today that is failing our clinics and that is failing our patients through no one's fault. It just hasn't been modernized. And so, you know, when I say that, I mean, I'm talking about analog record paper-based record keeping, paper-based identification, little sticky labels that identify that these are Liz Planck's eggs or Tara Comonte's embryos. I mean, you can't imagine it in 2023. And a 3-ring binder on a shelf that says that my eggs are over here in that tank. And so I would have liked to know that, because I would have paid more attention to what was sort of behind the scenes, and I would have known that I had choices. And certainly today, with companies like Tomorrow and many others coming into the space in various different forms to empower patients, to empower clinics to raise that standard of care, I would have asked a lot more questions and gone a lot deeper in terms of that sort of behind the scenes.
And we're going to talk about what you're doing about that, and how you're addressing some of those issues. But that, I've read that people's tissue is kept in plastic milk jugs, and it was sort of a system set up for cattle. I mean, it's so archaic and so creepy.
It is, it's certainly outdated, let's put it that way. Human IVF came out of livestock breeding. So when you see these milk jugs, for want of a better term, but that is what they look like, they're these little tanks, and these poor embryologists and clinicians haven't had another option up until this time. And they, you open them up and they're jam-packed full of frozen eggs and frozen embryos, and they've got these little labels on them. And there's a better way now. But yeah, it certainly doesn't jive with what we imagine for modern day medicine. And it certainly doesn't jive, I think, for a field such as this, which is in many ways is so progressive and is helping people achieve their dreams of building a family. And yet, behind the scenes, we haven't managed to update sort of the tools that support them.
Liz, to say you've been open about your experience is an understatement, because you shared your journey. Journey is such a cheesy word, isn't it? It's so overused these days. But anyway, you shared your experience on Armchair Expert podcast with your friend Monica Padman. So what prompted you to really want to be transparent about all of this?
Well, all of this, right? I went from, I'm an oversharer already, but also I'm all or nothing as well. And so I went from feeling very ashamed of the fact that I would freeze my eggs, or being so ashamed that I wouldn't want to do it, to, well, now I'm going to do it and I'm going to tell everybody about it, because I wish I had seen that, right? I wish I had, really frozen my eggs 10 years earlier. And so I felt, just a responsibility to really share all of the ins and out of it. And again, the reaction was so, I thought, oh, this is going to be kind of a niche thing, right? Like an egg freezing podcast is not necessarily, a common thing. And yeah, we were really surprised. I've had men come up to me in public with their wives, I'm getting my wife to listen to the podcast, it's great. I've had, even the clinic I did the podcast with, or that I did my egg freezing with, Kindbody, they were we all listen to it, we bring it up in our meetings in terms of how to make things better and find where there are flaws in the system. So it's been really remarkable to see just how relatable this is.
And what did, other than people saying, my wife's going through the same process, did you get any other interesting feedback from listeners? And what did they share about their experiences? Did they mirror your own, or were they more varied?
What struck me is that it is such an emotional process, right? Just like anything in women's health or in health in general, we think about it in terms of the body and the technology, but there's so much there's such an emotional, journey as well. And so that really struck me in some of the comments, and even people again coming up to me and crying into my arms, but also that men have a biological clock too. Coming back to what Tara is saying, half of IVF cases are due to male infertility, and 70% of men do not think that they have a biological clock. And if a man is also, I bring this up a lot, that we have a term geriatric pregnancy, but we don't have a term for men. It should be a geriatric ejaculation. After the age of 35, it increases pregnancy loss by 30%. These are even fetal alcohol syndrome, right? We think about it only we gotta make sure women aren't drinking. the man drinking in the 6 months before conception increases fetal alcohol syndrome by 30% as well. So men are involved in the process of children and life, right? And they should be included. And I was shocked to see a lot of women saying, I would go, even at the doctor, they were so focused on figuring out what was wrong with the woman and how she was contributing to the fertility issue. And they would lose time by not actually addressing how men have fertility and they have a biological clock too.
I imagine a lot of the young women in this room think about, oh, maybe I'll freeze my egg, but they really don't know what that encompasses. Can you just quickly take us through? You have to give yourself shots, right? I mean,
Yes.
Tell us, because, I think some people think, oh, yeah, I go in and they retrieve my eggs, but it's a process.
It is. It's kind of a month. It's not a commitment, but a little bit. So basically, you go in, you have a kind of interview with your uterus, and they go in and they tell you what your fertility levels are like. And again, I blacked out during that hour with the doctor because I didn't even know if I've never been pregnant, so I didn't even know how many eggs I didn't even know if I could have children, right? There were so many things and they give you a ton of information, and it's okay, like they'll send it to you by email, so even if you don't remember everything, that's fine. And then for about 10 days, you do shots, you're mixing them yourself. There's a lot of video tutorials that are great. I would film your doctor or nurse explaining it to you because, again, it can be overwhelming. And then I did it with Monica. I can't do shots. It's insane to me. Injecting myself is just not possible. It's like eye drops. I can't even put eye drops in my own eyes. So I can't inject my stomach. So if you have a friend or, again, a family member, or if you're doing it with your partner, they can do your shots every night at the same time. There's certain things you can eat or not eat. I wouldn't drink, or if you smoke pot or do that for anxiety or anything else, I would just not do that for the duration of it. And then you do your trigger shot 24 hours before, which is a bigger shot. And then you go in, and the retrieval is the easiest part. It was helpful when people told me that because it's a surgery, you go under, but it's 15 minutes. It's the best nap of your life, and then you wake up, and it's done. And then there's a little bit of a period, 2 or 3 days, where I recommend, if you can take off work or work from home. I've had physical kind of pain from it because it's a needle, they go in and suck in little eggs. But it's hard. It's like anything that's really purposeful, or that it was a challenging experience, but I got so much out of it. I got in touch with how amazing the female body is, how much my body can do, and I felt pregnant. I'd be taking Ubers, and I was there's a lot of bumps. I got to take care of my eggs. You're caring about something else more than you, and I've never had a dog, so I feel that was a good exercise. Yes.
But it's educational, right?
Yes.
It's contained. Yes. It's actually quite a contained period of time.
Yes.
It's incredibly educational.
Yes.
Because,
true.
Almost to go back to the what do we wish we knew, when I think about sex education, so I have an 8-year-old daughter and 2 teenage boys. Sex education, I don't know about anyone else in this room, but and I certainly fall into the geriatric mother stage, because I was 41 when I had my IVF baby. But I was, I don't know what age sex ed starts, sex ed starts 10, 12, 13.
It depends where you live.
Don't get pregnant. Yeah. And that was it. And, we were terrified as girls, as teenage girls, certainly where I grew up in the UK, about getting pregnant. And at no point later in life did the other half of that equation arrive. At no point did anyone tell me the rest of the story. And so instead, age 41, I'm trying to have a baby, and they're like, oh, sorry. Have you ever heard of advanced maternal age? You're 6 years past it. And it's what? And so I just think it's crazy that we have to go through these processes in order to get education around something that is a basic human right, which is our ability to build a family.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
I agree. But it's sometimes disappointing because, for example, Monica was a little disappointed with the outcome of her experience versus you. And do they prepare you for that?
They do, you know, so
Well, why don't you- explain.
So Monica and I had different results, which even actually my doctor knew we were like doing a podcast about it. And early on she was like, you know, try not to compare numbers, which in life in general is always good advice, but particularly with this. She'd been on birth control for basically 15 years, and I have not. So another thing I do recommend, if you are on birth control, just like stop for a few months before going into it, because that's one big learning that Monica had. Because yeah, I got 13 eggs, which is good, but kind of average or below average. What you want is 20 in order to guarantee one pregnancy, because of, you know, all of the things that can happen when you defrost the eggs, put the sperm in, freeze them again, and do all this stuff. And but Monica only got 2. And that's basically like almost like having 0, unfortunately. And so it was this really, I was talking to my mom about it that day because Monica was, you know, out of sorts, and my mom has had 2 miscarriages, and she's like, it's like a miscarriage. Like, you've been taught, and we were talking about it every day. She put herself out there publicly, right? And at a certain point, I was like, you know, you don't even have to talk about the fact that you only got 2 eggs if you don't want to. But she ended up doing it, and we ended up having Esther Perel come in and kind of give us her like a kind of free therapy session, an expensive one. And Esther Perel talked about the concept of ambiguous loss, which is when you lose something that you never really had. Right? And it's, again, very common with miscarriages. But even with the egg freezing process, I built already a connection with my future child. Like, that was one of the coolest parts of the egg freezing process. It was really a spiritual kind of experience for me. And I think, again, for a lot of women, and we have to talk about that part too, not just like, oh, it's painful and like transvaginal ultrasounds, you know. Yes, there's that part. But then, yeah, you're like starting this new chapter of your life, and I think that's really exciting.
I want to talk to Tara about the sort of the gaps in this whole process, but I'm just curious, Liz, do you make different decisions now when it comes to like dating, or do you feel less pressure, like defined, to ask the guy on the first date, are you going to be the father of your children?
Yeah, I don't ask that anymore. So dating has been way more fun. Again, not just for the other person, but for me as well. A few things, right? So first of all, freezing your egg, I don't know if anyone watches Nathan Fielder's show, The Rehearsal. That show came out when we were doing our egg freezing process, and the joke of that show is just he rehearses like life experiences. So he rehearses, having a kid and with a woman that's like a paid actor. It's like, it's a comedy. But we were like, this is like a rehearsal, right? And I was, dating someone at the time, and I was like, this schedule is not going to work. Like, he works at night, and like, even though we weren't, talking about that, I was able to sort of see not just what kind of partner I would want in terms of, emotions or characteristic or qualities, but also, sort of what parenthood would look like. And the second thing that really shifted for me was, again, Esther came in, for that last episode, and I asked her, I was like, how do I not, feel this pressure? And she was like, Liz, like, you've revolutionized the way that you are going to get pregnant, right? You've done this amazing thing that 10 years ago didn't even really exist. Why aren't you revolutionizing the way that you're going to create a family? Why are you only thinking about, I gotta find, the Mr. Right or Mrs. Right, like the person I want to do this with, and that has, we have to be in love, we have to do it like the way that my parents did it, when it's like, I'm not doing anything the way that my parents did it. So it really, even like having a child with a sperm donor, we had a woman come on and talk about that and that experience. Or even we had Andrew Sullivan, who had a kid with a lesbian couple, and he's gay, and they, there's all kinds of different ways of having a family. And I think that it, broadening that idea as well is a really important part of this conversation.
Yeah, it's empowerment, right?
Yeah, exactly. So obviously, Liz is one example of how this has really exploded. People are talking about it. People are doing it, Tara. And needless to say, the infrastructure for this technology is sorely outdated. So you see this and you say, I'm going to build a company because
there's a better way. Because patients demand and expect more, and clinics demand and expect more. And this is about how people build their families. So this is why Tomorrow Life Sciences exists.
Tell me what kinds of things you all are focused on, because there's a whole process, as we heard. And are you really focused on the back end? Just tell me sort of
Yes.
the goals for your company and what you hope to accomplish.
So we're a very mission-based company. Our mission is to safeguard life's most precious cells. That may include frozen eggs, frozen embryos, frozen sperm. We've created the world's first and only automated platform for how those frozen specimens, frozen eggs, frozen embryos, are managed in an IVF clinic. And what does that really mean in sort of basic terms? It means taking the milk jugs, as you referred to them as, but the tanks that are in these clinics today that date back decades, and replacing them with very sophisticated, safe, automated systems, so that you remove multiple points where a human has to interact with them. A human has to touch them, because the more human interaction we have in any process, there are many parallels in many other industries, the more opportunity for risk we have. And that's certainly the case here. So tomorrow's automation removes more than 90% of the points of potential failure that exist within the outdated manual system. And then it's other things like just how to identify them. I said to Liz when we first met, how do you think, actually the first question was, where are your frozen eggs? Because where I can.
And what did you say, Liz?
I froze. She was like, "Are you frozen?" I was like, "No, I'm just thinking."
Yeah. And so, when we have transparency into everything else in our lives, I checked my 17-year-old got home from his party last night on Life 360 before I went to sleep. I did. He hates that I can do it. He's like, when I'm 18, it's illegal to track me. Which, I'm like, well, for as long as I'm paying for your tuition, it's not. Yeah. But anyway, but if I can track, we track our friends. He tracks his friends, right? They all know where they are on Snap. If we can track our friends, we track our pizzas. I can turn the AC on in my house before I arrive. I order my Uber. But I don't know where my frozen eggs or embryos are. It's mind-blowing. So tomorrow digitizes, in the simplest form, digitizes the identification and tracking and monitoring of frozen eggs and embryos, as well as automating the process. And that provides significantly higher levels of safety for the clinics. It serves the clinics a lot better, and it also presents much higher levels of transparency to a patient. So, for example, we're creating a patient app. We serve clinics first and foremost, but it's very easy for us to allow those clinics or enable those clinics to give transparency to a patient so that I can see, Liz can look up on her phone where her frozen eggs are, how many she had, that they're cold, that they're safe, just the equivalent of my paper digital ultrasound that I had when I was going through it, So it's really about modernizing the back end.
And are the containers different now, and the way they're stored?
Obviously
I'm obsessed with that.
If you really want to dive in, you can go to our website. We remove the milk jugs are gone.
Yeah.
They're gone.
Yeah.
You don't see them. No, the Tomorrow platform is you'll see on our website if you look. It's a very slick, tech-enabled. The embryologist logs in using retina scanning, so it's highly secure. It's very sophisticated automation that basically picks and places where the specimens are stored. All the data is backed up to the cloud. We use digital tags to identify whose specimens are whose. We integrate with the electronic medical records in a clinic so that there's no ability for your record to get mixed up with your specimens. So lots of different pieces to the platform. Yeah. But at its heart, this is about safety, automation, best-in-class technology to really, really enable clinics to best serve their patients.
So what has the reaction been? Because I was shocked to learn that clinics are not regulated at all. And so have clinics welcomed this technology? Have some told you, hey, get out of here, you crazy broad? What are they saying?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, this is, clinics are the demand for IVF and for egg freezing and sperm freezing too. You talk about the men getting educated. So all of the above. The existing infrastructure is creaking at the seams, as you can imagine. So Clinics are absolutely leaning in. Some of the leading clinics in the world have adopted Tomorrow technology, clinics like CCRM, Boston IVF, San Diego Fertility Center, Vios in Chicago, which is now a Kind Body clinic, and so on. So they're really, really welcoming it. But I think the shift that we'll now continue to see in the next few years as we talk about education and empowerment, and particularly women getting on the front foot, is patients are going to demand it. You know, when people say to me, what should I know? What should I ask?
Yeah, that was going to be my next question.
Yeah,
What should people look for when they're finding a clinic?
Right. You know, I mean, a lot of it is word of mouth. How was your experience? But also, if we're going to get educated, if you're going to get educated around how long would you describe your process was? I mean, you wrote off a month, but it's 2 weeks, basically.
Yeah.
Right? So if you're going to get so educated about the 2-week process of freezing your eggs, but you're going to freeze your eggs for 5 years, 7 years, 10 years, who knows how long. As we get educated about that whole continuum, actually, this is the bit that matters just as much as this, because I'm not going to go and spend 15 grand freezing my eggs, injecting my stomach full of hormones, and then have them sitting in a milk jug in the corner. No thanks. So do you have digital identification, or do you have, paper-based sticky labels? And no, printing off a label still equals paper, right? Printing does not equal digital. Do you have automated systems conducting thousands of daily checks to check my specimens are safe? Or do you have a human being having to use their eyes and check that everything looks okay? Do you have alarms that are predictive versus reactive? There are lots of sort of simple questions that patients can ask.
Will this modernization make eggs more viable? Because I know that's sort of a question, right, as time goes by, and I'm assuming the storage techniques, et cetera, can impact the viability of eggs in the future. So does that go hand in hand with the modernization of these storage facilities and these clinics?
What the storage facility can't do is make a better egg, right, or a better embryo, but what it can do is make sure that they stay safe. And so, unfortunately, we don't have to look very far to find problems with the existing infrastructure. So, for example, when I first met your team, and a couple of weeks ago, and I was starting to describe what we do, and one of your team said, stop, you don't need to go any further. I totally get it. One of my friends, she lost her embryos. They couldn't find them. Liz and I were talking, and she said, I get it. She said, one of Monica's friends, they lost her eggs. And so, just as we don't need to look far for someone who's thinking about freezing their eggs, freezing their sperm, or going through IVF, or seeking help, we also, sadly, don't need to look far to see where the system and the infrastructure is breaking. So what modernization certainly does is address that. Mm-hmm. So
but I would imagine, I guess I'm getting at if sort of the circumstances or the conditions under which these embryos or eggs are being stored, if it's not temperature controlled, for example, if there aren't uniform standards because it's not regulated, will some of the things that you're doing make sort of preserve the viability just because of the things that can be better controlled? Does that make sense?
Potentially. Right now, it's a little bit of a black hole of information as it relates to the existing infrastructure, because you can't monitor something you can't see, right? There is no data when it's analog and paper-based.
Right.
Over time, you may well be right. What we do know is that we need to preserve these specimens. They're incredibly delicate, in particularly eggs, incredibly precious. And so, yes, we need systems that can monitor those environmental conditions 24/7 to maximize the chances of them being the highest possible quality and safe at all times.
Do you think that will ever happen, Tara? Do you think that there will be more regulation of these clinics?
I do. Yeah, I do. I think the world's waking up. I'm possibly slightly cynical when I think about regulation, in that I think that regulation tends to follow funding. And women's healthcare has historically been quite an underfunded part of the broader healthcare system. despite 80% of the healthcare wallet being controlled by women in this country. So as funding flows to women's health, and by the way, I call it women's health, but it's really not women's health. It's men's health too.
Right.
But as funding flows to this part of the health ecosystem, as employers start covering it, as it becomes more federally mandated, being included in insurance policies, I do think regulation will come. And patients are beginning to demand it. You know, sadly, we have patients at the other end of a negative experience who are now educated and saying, whoa, like, what do you mean this doesn't have more regulation around it? And there is some here or there, particularly as it relates to donor specimens, but it's certainly less regulated than I think any of us would possibly imagine. So I think it will come.
I always think that if we spent as much money and time and attention on women's health issues as we did Viagra, think of how far we'd be, right? I mean, that just makes me crazy.
Well, by the way, I think Viagra is probably covered by most health insurance.
Yeah, well, I wanted to ask about that. So I know a lot of big companies are starting to cover egg freezing for their employees, but do you know the status of that? I mean, did your insurance cover it, Liz?
No, I didn't even have insurance. I was a freelancer. I mean, this is bad. Don't do that. But I just, I had to save up. And that was one of the main, of course there was the shame of I'll meet someone. I don't have to do it that way. But it was also this is so expensive. This is so much money. And in your 20s, you have even less money, when the time is the best to do it. And I never had an employer that covered it. And, and again, one of the biggest parts, especially with Monica.
Sorry.
It's a good ringtone. Is that your ringtone?
I'm so glad
I love
that's not one of us.
We're going to do a ticking sound with the goddamn phone. Okay, sorry. Go ahead, sorry.
That's so funny.
What was the question?
No, it was about insurance.
But
just
yeah,
kidding,
it's so expensive. And again, if it doesn't work, I got 13, and so I guess it worked. But they were like, you should do another round, and I was like, I don't know, absolutely, I don't, not now. But Monica, she got 2 eggs, and you don't get your money back, all right? You don't get a second trial, and I think that again, it's one of the most overmarked, is that the right term, right? Health procedures that you can get, meaning they do mark up the price because
it's $10,000 to $15,000
yes.
a time.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yes, at minimum, right? And so, that's a lot of money, and obviously there's so many things, as to your point about women's health, that are not accessible to women in this country, particularly poor women, particularly women of color. But egg freezing is one of the least accessible, things in America.
Yeah.
How can we democratize the process, Tara? How can we demand that clinics be regulated, right? Which seems like a pretty
And in the
baseline
meantime, it's going to be
expectation,
regulated
right?
to be modern. Yeah.
And that it's more affordable, that insurance covers it, that companies start waking up. What do you think the path forward is?
It's a great question. So today, about 20% of large employers in the US, only large employers, cover fertility benefits. Okay. It's increasing, and it's increasing quite quickly, but not fast enough. I think over the next 10 years, we will see that every employer has to provide fertility benefits. Fertility care is healthcare, full stop. This is about how we own our journeys. This is about having kids. Not, if I'm not ready, but getting ahead of it. It's about having control of how and when and my ability to have kids. So employers need to cover it. It needs regulation. It needs modernization, but it needs to be accessible to all of us. I think we will see employers increasingly include it in fertility packages because their employees demand it. So what can we do today? Go knock on the door of your HR team and say, hey, do we have fertility benefits in our package? And if not, why not?
Yeah, exactly.
That's how benefits packages, anyone in any company that's ever run any company will tell you that there is a decision that's made every year about what goes into a benefits package in a company and what you're going to pay for and to what level. That thought process is dictated by the employees. It's dictated by what they ask for and what the team is hearing most. So demand it. 68% of adults in the US today would change employers for fertility coverage.
Wow.
68% is huge. And so employers have to wake up.
And employees have a lot of leverage.
And employees have a huge amount of leverage.
What about the technology? I mean, what are you excited about in terms of the technology that's developing when you think about this field? Are there other things on the horizon that you're keeping an eye on in terms of all these issues?
Absolutely. There are so many companies like Tomorrow Life Sciences and others coming into the field. We tackle a very big problem that is only getting bigger as demand increases. But there are companies coming in, there are AI companies coming in, to your point around safeguarding and choosing the best embryo or the best egg, companies using AI to do that. There are financing companies coming in the absence of it being covered by insurance or employers, to help people to create financing packages and sort of insurance packages where you can get your money back if it doesn't work. Oh. There are concierge companies coming in that help you through the process and hold your hand ahead of time, so that if you don't have a friend who's been through it, that you are armed with information. There are companies coming in, if you need an egg donor, help me find egg donors or donate my eggs. I can donate my eggs today with one company that we partner with, and I can freeze my eggs, and if I donate half, my egg freezing is paid for. So there's just a huge amount of innovation in the space, and it's come fast, and it's going to continue. And it goes to empowerment. It goes to us shifting this balance, right? Between I think about the birth control pill when it came in 1960 and how it separated having sex and having babies. And I think we're going to look back on this time as we really embrace the ability to freeze our eggs and how we pay for it and actually access that. The separation of conceiving and carrying a pregnancy. It completes that circle of reproductive control for a woman around how and when I have my family, and is one of the biggest things that I think we'll see in our lifetime to close the gender inequality gap. I really believe that.
It gives so much freedom to women, but do you ever get pushback like, this is against nature, this is too high tech, this is, messing with the way Mother Nature is, because I can imagine you do hear that, right? That it's a little too future shocky.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's ridiculous when I hear it. This is medicine, this is science, this is innovation, this is healthcare, this is advancement. I embrace it, just like we all do as we see advancements in the field of medicine and healthcare. That's what this is. Yes, it's around the topic of family building and women's health, and that used to be taboo and have stigma associated with it. There's nothing weird or creepy or whatever adjective you use. This is education. This is advancement. It's incredible.
And no one ever says it about Viagra.
That's
right?
true.
Like, that's messing with
like
Mother
you're
Nature.
Supposed to have an erection naturally.
Yes,
yeah.
exactly.
Yeah,
no one says that.
Exactly. Is it a fake erection? I mean,
Yeah. Liz, we've talked a lot about changing cultural perceptions, and now young women are sometimes getting egg freezing. People are paying, I guess, parents ostensibly for their egg freezing as graduation presents, to kind of remove that pressure and that window that they feel exists. So when do you think women should start thinking about this? And is there anything you learned from your experience that would be valuable to hear today?
Yeah, I think, again, so one thing that actually I think is a fun fact that I enjoyed, I did black out in that first meeting, but I do remember one thing that she said, which was, you had the most amount of eggs, I thought was like in my 20s or like, and she's like, no, when you were born, when you were still actually in utero is when you have the most amount of eggs. And for some reason that felt good for me to hear, because it was like, I wasn't like, oh, I missed my window in my early 20s when I was super fertile. It's like, no, I was super fertile when I was, still a baby. baby, which is not when I should have been making a baby. And so that I thought was, for me, was sort of liberating. So I want to share that with people. But yeah, I would start in my early 20s, or I would start just thinking about it in my 20s. I had this Uber driver that brought me to one of my appointments. She was like, oh, what are you doing? I was like, oh, I'm freezing my eggs. And she was like, I tell everybody, I say in your 20s, on your 25th birthday, do a little GoFundMe birthday party. Instead of bringing presents, donate to my, this female Uber driver was just talking to me about it. And we recorded, actually, I recorded it as a voice memo with her consent. And we played it on the podcast. And yeah, she was like, instead of presents, just give me a donation right towards my egg freezing and start saving up early. Because yeah, it's a lot of money, but if you're thinking about it over a few years, it's actually, if you're thinking about it throughout your 20s and you do it when you're 30, it's, $1K a year instead of a big shot, when you turn that age.
Yeah. Do it early.
Yeah, do it early.
You do it early. I mean, as Liz said, we're born with all our eggs. They, diminish over our lifetime, and so the earlier you do it, the better chances you have of having maximum number of eggs and the highest quality eggs.
Yeah.
That's the age of a woman's eggs is the single biggest contributing factor to a successful pregnancy.
Yeah.
So
And technology is freedom. Yeah. Technology is freedom for women more than anybody. And we're in Texas right now, right? And there are 4 women who are suing Texas over anti-abortion laws, putting their health in jeopardy and putting their lives in danger. And there's one woman that gave a testimony this week. She was trying to save the life of one of her twins she had to abort one twin in order to save the other one, and they literally wouldn't let her, and she had to go out of state and put her health in jeopardy. And in her testimony, she said, it's insane that my dog can get an abortion, but I can't in Texas, right? And technology is helping revolutionize abortion. Most abortions don't happen in a clinic anymore. They happen with pills. That's, again, one of the greatest technology advancements of our time, and yet, tech bros aren't talking about it. But these advancements are amazing, right? With fertility or abortion care, it's, instead of seeing it as, something that's bad or something that's unnatural, it's like, no, that's something that's freeing for us. Yeah.
In fact, I was telling Tara, I met a young woman who's working for a company that is trying to figure out how to stave off menopause that women can then choose, because I can say from personal experience, after menopause it's kind of downhill, ladies, I'm just saying. And it doesn't have to be, but it is sort of a bummer when your estrogen goes away. And so I mean, imagine that, being able to really have the freedom to, manage that part of your life. Right. So it is pretty amazing. Yeah. Well, this is so fascinating. Thank you both so much. And I want to thank Tara, because you have a very special swag bag for our audience today. I feel like I'm back on my talk show. Look under your chair. Not really. Can you tell us a little bit about the goodies?
No, I'm not going to tell you. You have to enjoy them yourselves.
You're gonna find them very pleasing. Yeah. Let's just put it that way.
All I said to the Tomorrow team was, either do great swag or don't do swag at all.
Okay. So enjoy. Thanks, everyone. Thank you.